For this video, I'll be doing a complete refurb on this 2008 dual suspension Rocky Mountain Element 50. These made in Canada Rocky bikes were lightweight cross-country mountain machines known for efficient climbing and responsive handling. The aluminum frame combined with the front and rear Fox racing shocks and the top-of-the-line Shimano LX components made for a durable, versatile bike. This 2008 Element 50 was part of the iconic Rocky Mountain Element series, which was designed to balance racing and endurance, and often considered a great trail bike for technical, wet, or rocky terrain. Interestingly, the Element was first introduced in 1996 and largely unchanged for 16 years until 2005, when carbon seat stays were introduced, which are on this bike. And then in 2012, Rocky went full carbon. Anyway, I'll get going on stripping the bike. With the frame stripped, I was able to check all of the rear suspension pivot points to ensure they were moving freely. The link pivots right behind the bottom bracket were completely seized and will need attention. I'll remove the bolts that hold the linkage to the frame to get access to the pivot bearings, and pop off the bearing dust covers, and then using some rust penetrant, I kept working the bearing back and forth until it started spinning freely. It was probably a dirt buildup combined with moisture that led to the bearings seizing. I'll clean up the bearings and repack with a waterproof grease and then put things back together. As I was cleaning up the rear derailleur, it became apparent why the chain was so tangled up on the bike. The B-screw stop pivot on the rear derailleur was completely seized and prevented the derailleur to hold proper tension on the chain. So I popped off the little C-clip, and then using a 30T Torx and some rust-penetrating spray, I kept working the pivot screw back and forth until it finally broke loose. Again, it was probably sand and grit buildup combined with moisture that led to the B-screw stop pivot seizing up. The front shocks will also need attention as the lockout control was not working. I used a 2.5mm hex wrench to remove the top cap, noting the orientation of the cap. With the cap off, there was quite a bit of crud that needed to be cleaned out. When I took a pair of needle nose pliers and tried turning the lockout shaft, it wouldn't move. With a bit of rust penetrating spray and some gentle turning back and forth, the lockout shaft started working properly. The lockout control is actually quite sensitive to dirt, so it's important to keep the bike clean and dry. For the wheels, DT Swiss 445Ds were on the bike. DT Swiss wheels are generally considered strong, reliable, and decent budget-orientated disc rims, which are great for cross-country riding. I checked the front wheels for true, and surprisingly the front wheel was almost bang on, but the rear wheel required a few tweaks. I love this Park Tool truing stand as it allows me to easily change between any size wheels quickly, and it's very accurate. The top part of the decals easily peeled away, and along with general rock chips, the wheels will also need some attention. So I'll go ahead and remove the old decals and prep the wheels for a repaint. As the wheels will need to be sanded getting them ready for primer, I'm thinking of changing the color from white to black. I personally prefer a black on black stealthy look when it comes to rims and tires, as black is much easier to maintain and keep clean, but let me know what you'd do in the comments. The primer and black paint have been completed, and I think the wheels turned out pretty good. Anyway, I'll get going on putting this bike back together. I'll go ahead and install the bolt that holds the linkage to the frame and test the rear suspension to ensure it moves freely. Next, I'll reinstall the Fox Float rear shock using a 5mm hex wrench, noting the orientation of the shock. For the rear shock, the air pressure should be about the same as the rider's weight. A special high-pressure air shock pump is required that has a 2-piece air chuck. Before pumping the shock, separate the 2-piece chuck and then screw on the outside part of the chuck to the shock's air valve. And then tighten the inside fitting for an accurate pressure reading. When inflating has been completed, simply unscrew the outside part of the chuck first so air does not escape from the shock. With the rear shock installed, I'll go ahead and install the Fox RL front shock. Once I've completed the bike, I'll recheck that all of the bolts have been torqued to spec. I'll ensure the shock spins freely with no play in the shock, simply by torquing the top cap screw. As I've mentioned on previous videos, my favorite part of the build is when the wheels go on and the bike starts looking like a bike again. The Race Face Evolve XC crankset will go on next. I'll lightly grease the parts of the shaft that will ride on the bottom bracket bearings. The cranks are an integrated 24mm X-type chromoly spindle, which is compatible with many Race Face and Shimano external bottom brackets. And then I'll install the drive side using an 8mm hex wrench to secure the bolt. The Shimano Deore XT rear derailleur will go on next. I always check the swing of the derailleur to ensure it's lined up with the large and small cogs. It's easy at this point without the chain on to install the limit screws if required. The front derailleur is next, and I'll simply use the old position that the derailleur was in, but the cage should be about 1 to 2 millimeters above the teeth of the large chainring. Next, I'll go ahead and install the Race Face Evolve XC handlebars that were originally on the bike, and will keep the original patina of the bars. The Shimano Deore LX M580 shifters and brake levers will go on next, and I'll use the grips to get an approximate spacing. And then I'll go ahead and wire up the shifters. While I'm wiring up the shifters, I should mention that these Deore M580 shifters, in my opinion, are the best performance shifters out there. They were known for their rugged, long-lasting durability, reliability, and precise shifting indexing, and comfortable ergonomics that offered a crisp feel. With the shifters connected, I'll need to use a new chain, as the chain that was on the bike did not pass the stretch test. I'll use the old chain to size the new one and ensure the overall length accounts for the quick link I'll be using. Ensure that the chain routes around the derailleur wheels and not on the outside of the derailleur guides. And then I'll simply snap the quick link together using my wonderful Park Tool MLP-1 quick link pliers. The bike is shifting great, and I just love how these Shimano Deore derailleurs and shifters perform. Next, I'll go ahead and install the new hydraulic disc brakes. I'm not happy with how much slack there is, but it's typical for brake manufacturers to leave extra slack, where the hose can then be cut to the specific size for the bike. I'll use a piece of regular brake housing to get the required size for the hydraulic hose. Hydraulic tubing vise blocks will ensure I get a parallel hose cut, and I'll use a utility knife with a fresh blade. Next, I'll use a new olive and barb and ensure all of the fittings go onto the hose in the proper order. In my case, I'll be using BH59 fittings. And then I'll use the vise blocks again and tap the barb into the hose. I've kept the brake lever in the upright position to ensure air doesn't enter, and will top up the lever and hose with a high-quality hydraulic mineral oil. When the hose is inserted into the brake lever and tightened down with an 8mm wrench, any excess oil will be pushed out of the system. There are no leaks at the fitting, so I'll go ahead and install the brake. I'll use zip ties to hold the hose in place. And then I'll attach the brake caliper to the frame. I'll leave the mounting bolts slightly loose and squeeze the brake lever to center the pads on the brake router, and then tighten the bolts down. I was happy with the length of the front brake hose, and it installs the same as the rear. So not much else left with this build, other than to install a nice saddle and a set of lock-on grips. And now this classic do-it-all cross-country bike from the 26-inch wheel era, prized for its exceptionally efficient hand-built frame and lively handling, is now ready for another marathon race or just some fun aggressive trail riding. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.